A warm welcome to the History Show here on Uxbridge FM. And Ken Pearce is back, chairman of the Uxbridge Local History Society. Morning, Ken. How are you?
Oh, good morning. Very well, thank you.
Now, our first talk this morning is called A Vet Remembers. When you're ready, Ken.
All right, thank you. Reginald Hancock was born in 1892 and grew up in Uxbridge. He was the son of William Hancock, a veterinary surgeon, and also an outstanding athlete. He captained Uxbridge Football Club, was a useful cricketer, and enjoyed cross-country running. The canal was often frozen over in winter in those days, and he sometimes skated to Paddington and back on the ice-covered canal. William's wife Edith was the daughter of Ferdinand Greatrex, a reclusive man who was said to receive a royal pension. This and the surname Greatrex, which of course means great king, gave rise to the story that he was descended from an illicit affair with a member of the royal family. Anyway, he treated his daughter like a domestic servant, so eventually his daughter ran away and they had a runaway marriage. There was later a reconciliation. So Reginald grew up before the age of the motor car, the telephone, and electricity. Uxbridge was still then a market town before London sprawled out and it became a suburb of the capital. His father's work as a vet was therefore mainly concerned with horses. Domestic pets were a very small part of the practice in those days. There were hundreds of horses in this district. Every business employed horses for transporting goods. And many people were employed looking after the animals too: blacksmiths, saddlers, harness makers, grooms, stable boys. There were makers of carriages and carts as well, aided by wheelwrights. Breweries employed draymen. Job masters owned horses and hired them out to customers. And William Hancock was not the only vet in the town. The family left Uxbridge in 1908 and settled in Beaconsfield. But by this time, Reginald himself had decided to follow his father and attended the Royal Veterinary College in Camden Town. And by the time he qualified, World War I had broken out. And so he became an officer in the Army Veterinary Corps. He spent most of the war in France, where injuries and deaths to horses were on an enormous scale. The work was harrowing, and the day of the horse on the battlefield was really coming to an end. In 1919, Reginald returned to private practice in Beaconsfield until 1946, when he was appointed Chief Veterinary Officer to the RSPCA. And then in 1952, he published his autobiography under the title Memoirs of a Veterinary Surgeon. So I'd like now to read 3 short passages from the book that deals, of course, with his childhood in Uxbridge. So here's the first. My father's work fascinated me when I was a child, and especially when he was called out at night. We lived then in a red brick house at the bottom of Uxbridge High Street, 15 miles west of London. And often in the darkness, I heard the clatter of a horse galloping up the hill to pull up outside, and be tied to the iron railings that ran along the front of the house. Of course, there were no telephones in those days. The agitated messenger awoke the household with repeated bangs on the front door, and if no light appeared in the window, threw gravel at the upstairs panes. The gravel, of course, came from the main road, for tarring was not then done, and that Oxford Road was a dusty, stony one. In dry weather, great white clouds of dust arose at the passing of all traffic, moving faster than a walk. And the housewife who left her windows open found a cloud of dust filling her rooms and settling on the carpets and furniture. It is not often remembered that the fuggy, light-impeding curtains of the Victorians, upon we pour such scorn, were an effort to fight this ever-present dust. And I'm sure that much of the hatred which greeted the first motor cars was due to the exceptional amount of dust that they raised. In town streets, we inhaled dust all the time, including specks of desiccated horse dung, everlastingly blowing into the eyes. What a magnificent immunity to dust-borne diseases we must have had. Second passage. The veterinary surgeon, particularly in remote country districts, is often asked to act as a human physician. It may only mean supplying a bottle of that wonderfully powerful embrocation that cured the old mare of her lameness in order to put Granny's lumbago to rights. But it can have serious consequences if one is not careful. An old veterinary surgeon told me once that in his younger days, he was riding home from a farm, miles from anywhere, where he met the wife of an old shepherd. On passing the time of day, she told him of her man's illness, and that nothing the doctor gave him had any effect, in particular that his bowels refused to act. Could the vet give her one of his really strong cow drenches? She was quite sure that was what was needed. Well, it so happened that there was one in his saddlebag, so he gave it to the old lady and told her how to use it. Months later, he met the old lady again and asked after her husband. Oh, she said, that was wonderful, powerful physic you gave him. It worked after the first dose, and he never stopped crapping until he died. The notion that the physic might have caused the man's death, fortunately, did not seem to occur to her. Final passage. The horse population of Uxbridge in 1900, when a motor car was a startling sight in the high street, half dozen butchers would use a dozen or so active cribs to do their delivery. The milkmen and the bakers maintained stables. The brewery had a stud of 20 or 30 heavy draft horses, as did the timber merchants. Most of these studs were cared for by my father under yearly contract, and so much per horse per year. So within 10 minutes' walk of our surgery were several hundred horses, most of which he had been concerned over as advisor when they were purchased, and whose career he followed until they were disposed of. The local doctors and other professional folk all had their carriages and pairs, either for their professional purposes or for their women folk to do their shopping and visiting. Through the town passed day and night a stream of horse-drawn traffic, which called for first treatment in colic and lameness, and for shoeing. The forges were numerous, and the many inns in the high street all had large blocks of stables attached. 3/4 of a century earlier, Uxbridge had been the first post out of London where the westbound carriages changed their teams of horses. No fewer than 28 veterinary surgeons flourished in the town in those days, most of them owning forges to put faulty and damaged shoes to rights, for most lameness in those days was found in the foot, and the first ritual in all cases of lameness is still to take off the shoe and search the foot. The highly specialized knife that cuts the horn of the hoof in seeking for bruised areas and corns is still called a searcher. So Uxbridge High Street at the beginning of the 19th century was a street of inns. Beaconsfield High Street likewise still shows those big gateways to the majority of the houses at that time, inns, through which the coaches and wagons pulled to the stable yards behind. Uxbridge has long lost those archways in favour of the facades of the chain store. Why is it, by the way, that the standardised facades of these stores are so complacently hideous? One would have thought some trickle of their vast wealth could be diverted into making their omnipresent ugly lettering and elevations at least as worthy, say, as the bankers make theirs.
Well, thanks, Ken. I was wondering about ice skating down the canal. There must have been a few locks in the way, surely.
Yes, not many, strangely enough. One of the things about the canal was that the land, for the most part, is remarkably flat. So there wasn't much interruption. Further north, it's another matter, when you get into Buckinghamshire and so forth, the locks are more frequent there.
Yeah. And 28 vets in Uxbridge. Gosh. Right, well, thanks for that. We've got another one shortly, so stay with us.